Anyone remember that demon summoning action RPG? You know, that one that was in early access that received critical acclaim? That early access game that was used as an example to others in quality in early access? That's right, Nekro, that's the one. Well, it's gone from Steam. After over a year of zero updates from developers Darkforge Games, basically the company has imploded with public drama to boot. Developers Thomas and Scott have had a falling out, resulting in the removal of the kickstarted game, pretty much giving the title the official status of abandoned. Nekro was kickstarted back in 2012, which was a fairly long time ago, receiving just over $150,000 in funds. The game then went on to Steam's early access platform in 2014, 2 years later, and was initially well received by players and critics alike. After a few updates, everything stopped. No communication or anything until late 2015 when programmer Scott gave an update. Scott went on to say that he wanted to give a quick update on the game, that 2015 had been a crazy year for him and he had several personal issues outside his control that made progress on the game much harder than he would have liked, as the only coder on the game, and he basically had to drop everything to take care of family related business, which meant all production on the game basically stopped because there was no one else to actually program the game. Now, he states in this post, which was in December 2015, that the game has not been abandoned, but life has made working on Nekro difficult at the moment. So basically he's saying that the game is also almost done and it won't take much more to push it out the door and get at least a solid version 1.0. However, he did say that it may be a bit longer before I can resume work on it, as money, time and personal matters are all trying to slow things down. But he does say that the game will see the light of day and thanks everybody over the years for all the support. So at this point in the update, you're looking at nearly 4 years of development, coming up to 4 years of development on a game that realistically probably should have only taken maybe 1.5, 2 years of solid development to get it out the door. But forgiving the obvious delays and issues, everything was seemingly all well and good, and development had appeared to beginning to start up once more after an expended period of time in limbo. All the while, mind you, the game was still on sale on early access. Little was heard again until the veil started to weaken towards the middle of April in 2016, being this year, and business partner Thomas, who had been making all the art assets from the game, made a post on the Steam forums that was quickly taken down, to which then he posted the exact same post in a Steam review, which can't be simply taken down like a forum post can on Steam. So Thomas goes on to say that he is 50% owner of Darkforge Games LLC and that he himself was responsible for creating all the visual art that you've come to know as the game Nekro. Now, he wants to give an update to the state of the game and the state of the company itself. And he basically says the reason for this is that he wants the loyal fans and community to rally behind him to get the game completed and receive all the physical Kickstarter backer rewards. So he goes on to basically tell a story, and I quote, "What happened? Nekro was originally supposed to be a 1 to 1.5 year development cycle after the Kickstarter campaign. While blame can be placed on a great many things, we never actually had funding other than the Kickstarter and our personal finances, of which I spent every last penny I had. So we decided to rush to early access to help fund completion of the game. Once we got funding rolling in, I heard the same story year after year. Scott would say, 'I can't do it, I need another year.' This happened for 2 years. Bear in mind that Scott was taking 100% of all revenue, even though we have a contract that explicitly states that he can only take 50%. End quote. So he goes on to basically talk about in the post that in the last 5 months, 6 months of 2015, it became glaringly obvious that because Scott was not working on the game, he was still taking 100% of all the revenue, but basically stopped working on the game, and he himself says that he became too comfortable making money with no ambition to continue. So Thomas told Scott that you cannot take funds from the game unless you are working on it. This supposedly sent Scott into an uproar, and he blocked him out of every account there was, including the website, the Kickstarter, the Steam account. And finally, he alleges that Scott then emptied the funds of the LLC bank account and closed the bank account down. He then goes on to say that he was basically Thomas was forced to pay over $1,000 of his own money for the 2015 California tax license, as well as paying 50% of the taxes from the 2015 revenue, of which Scott took all 100% of the revenue for his own personal benefit. So he basically says that he cannot contact Scott. Scott has blocked him from communication in any way. But then he also goes on to state that basically, unless he directly gets control of ownership of Darkforge Games and Nekro itself, that basically there will be no future of the game. He also states and claims that he is the sole owner of all the physical Kickstarter backer rewards. He has them all in his possession and he's ready to ship them. He says that the game is almost complete as it is, so he will be able to finish the rest of the game in a short period of time after the transfer of ownership by himself. And what he wants from the community is to be very loud and demand that Scott hand over all the assets and accounts to the game. And he basically says that unless that happens, basically Nekro is done and it's finished and it's over. So ultimately Thomas makes some pretty serious allegations in this statement, including Scott had taken all the money from the sales and the Kickstarter to pay himself, other than what was used for the physical rewards, which were never sent out. Thomas accuses Scott of taking money while not actually working or intending to work on the project, and blocking him from access from everything, including the Kickstarter Steam, and clearing out all the business bank accounts. Thomas also claims that he is the only one who has the physical Kickstarter back rewards, and that he can in fact finish the game without Scott. Now, a few days later, Scott made several replies on the Steam forums, one confirming that the game is being abandoned due to a lack of money, stating that the game takes literally millions of dollars. Games take literally millions of dollars to make. The fact that we were able to do anything with less than 500k is a testament to our devotion, passion, and personal sacrifice. Ultimately, it wasn't to be, but that in no way means that we didn't try everything we had. We set our goal much lower than we should have, but any more and we wouldn't have gotten it. It's a huge risk either way. This was shortly followed by a direct reply to Thomas's allegations, all the while Scott continued to basically close down the game and gut the Steam forums. He basically goes on to say that he would rather not directly respond to the horrible post made by his partner, because he doesn't want to get into a bitching match. But he states that the fact that he basically wanted to make a public attack on his character only serves to show Thomas's true character. Now, he goes on to say basically what happened and give you some information, and I quote, "We made 168k on Kickstarter. Now, after taxes, fees, and no-show money, it was down to 130,000. Yes, 35 to 40k was lost right from the start. My partner immediately used $40,000 to buy new equipment, hire his buddies to make some models, and pay for all manner of software. When we had 90k left, now I knew the second we scaled the game up from where it was in the Kickstarter days that was going to take more than a year, more likely more than 2. So what we did is devise a plan that would help us spread the 90k over multiple years. Only one of them would go full time and the other would not. So who should go full time? Well, he knew art, I knew how to program, do art and back-end stuff, so the choice was pretty easy. In order to make Nekro with the money that we had, I would have to go full-time while he did not. This was something that we both agreed on, and it was really the only way to do it. Most mid-level programming positions start around 70,000 a year, so clearly I had to take a massive cut in salary to work on the game, as 70 divided by 2 or more years was barely a livable salary. I knew that I would need to put my savings into it as well, and I was fine with that. This was my passion project and I wanted to see it through. I would eat ramen noodles and do the whole indie dev thing, no big deal. This went on for years. We worked on the game as planned. I took less and less money as the money thinned out. Let me make that clear. I was taking below poverty line salary at some point to work on the game. I knew that one simple fact remained true. If I wasn't working on the game made no progress. None of the other team members knew how to code, and I'm sure you know, code is what makes game work. Therefore, I had to be the one to do it. Now, he directly responds to an accusation that Thomas made that says, bear in mind Scott was taking 100% of the revenue, even though we had a contract explicitly stating that he could only ever take 50% of the revenue. Scott goes on to say that this doesn't make any sense. If he took 100% of the revenue, the company would have run out of money immediately. Hell, if he only took 50%, the same thing would have happened. Mathematically, he says, it doesn't compute. We all put the revenue in the bank account. Then where I took small mail chunks to pay myself a salary since I had no other job. Thomas himself had a full-time job and was working on the game part-time, chose not to because he wanted to finish the game just like I did. I never asked, forced or told anyone to not take any money. We agreed to do it because less than 50k can't pay for multiple full-time employees plus taxes and overhead. It just doesn't work. Now, he says that the proof of this and the proof that it's not him is that the game was updated for years. He added to it, posting it, made videos and streamed for 8 hours a day showing that his work. If he wasn't working on the game and just started taking money, how did he make any updates? No one else knows how to code. What's his motivation to steal? The money was so thin at that point that it was less than someone was making working at McDonald's. I have no reason to steal from that, he says. I have every reason to get it done and finish the game, which was exactly what he was doing. Now, he says this brings us to now. The game simply wasn't as popular as he hoped, and it didn't end up making a lot of money. Of the 30,000 purchases on Steam Spy, 20,000 were from groupies, which sold our game for $1 single. We both took a huge risk making this startup. We put lots of our own cash into it, but it didn't work out. That's life, that's business, he said. Now, normally it would be that the project fails and we move on, but this part is ugly now. Thomas wants to get his money back, Scott claims. He feels that Thomas has basically feels that he has put money in, so he should get money out. Now, he says that's not how business works, that it's clearly how Thomas feels. So who does he target? He targets Scott. Now, interestingly enough, this is the part where the consumer is most at risk here, because Scott goes on to say that he refused to bring out the game of early access. He refused to bring the game out of early access without it being finished. He claims that Thomas actually wanted to cash it in so that he could see a return on his investment, basically releasing the game unfinished on Steam. Now, Scott says that he stopped Thomas from doing that. Scott said that he wouldn't bring it out of early access, seeing as it's wrong to essentially deceive the player base. And so then Thomas went to try and get the company from himself so he could directly release it out of early access. And he basically says that actually Thomas was the one who pulled the remaining money out of the business bank account to cut Scott off, and he was forced to move on from Nekro at that point. Something he clearly thought would make me give up on Nekro as well, so he threatened to sue. Thomas threatened to sue Scott, and it was all basically a massive clusterfuck. Scott ends the post by basically saying that he's really sad about his little game. All he wanted to do was finish it, but now he can't. And basically, he's sad to tell everybody that that's the case, and it was all just a big mess towards the end, and the company imploded. So, which of these is true? What is the actual deal here? For me, much of Scott's statement makes a lot of sense if it is true. The crazy spending spree at the start was always going to be problematic, but it is hard to feel sad about his programming salary estimates of 70,000 when both Scott and Thomas live in California, a notoriously expensive cost of living state. Here's a hint: if you're an indie developer, don't live in expensive places. It's kind of rule 101. Hell, even big developers are moving out of places like California to more economic states to cut down on overheads. It's basic business principles. You do not develop a game in an area where the cost of living is ridiculously high when you're an indie dev, when you're a one-man, two-man team. It is not realistic, and it's ultimately not fiscally responsible. There are a couple of things that don't make sense in Scott's post. One was the figure estimate of the Kickstarter earnings, 168,000, and it wasn't. It was actually 158,000, so there was 10 grand off there. Now, he also goes on to talk about the game sales using Steam Spy information, which I don't quite get. Why are you using information from Steam Spy? You're the developer. Surely you have bank records, info from Steam itself about sales. You should be able to give real numbers and know how much the game was selling and how much ultimately the game earned. Now, Scott did admit to taking a wage, which is fair enough, being the only full-timer on the job. However, even though his proof of working on the game lays in the updates and streams, from what I can tell after sifting through social media and related posts, considering that most of the actual Darkforge stuff has been taken down at this point, the game itself hadn't been updated or streamed by him since June 2015 at the latest. In late 2015 update that Scott gave, he himself admits to not have worked on the game for several months, which means that he did in fact pay himself a wage for the entirety of 2015, but did not work on the game for at least 6 months of that year, citing personal issues, which I get why Thomas is then frustrating, because that's almost a half a year gone, and you're still paying yourself, but you haven't actually worked on the game. And I understand that you've cited personal issues and things go wrong and stuff, but you know, if I have personal issues at work, I can't then take half a year off and expect to be paid my full-time salary. That doesn't compute. That's not how employment works. Even self-employment, that's not how self-employment works either. Now, Scott does refute on point, however, that he did not empty the bank account out, and that he claims that in fact it was Thomas who did this to try and get as much money back as he could. He says that Thomas was the one trying to take over the company, to release the game in an unfinished state, to essentially con consumers into making a quick buck for himself, and Scott would not allow him to do that. Now, Scott claims that Thomas does in fact does not have the Kickstarter physical rewards, and that he basically just said that in his post to slander Scott and get players on his side against Scott. Because Thomas had taken what was left in the bank account, Scott could no longer continue working on the game and thus removed it from Steam in an unfinished state. It's difficult to tell who's telling the truth here. It could be both, it could be none. It's probably somewhere in between, like most things are. From a business standpoint, it's clear from the info that there was some serious stakes made from the very get-go. Frankly, no indie should be trying to develop a game in California. It's just ridiculous, especially on consumers' money. But hey, what about us? What about the consumer? What about the Kickstarter backers? Yes, the Kickstarter backers took a risk. There was always the possibility that the game wasn't going to get finished. However, I still don't think that developers, both Thomas and Scott, have done right by the player base and the backers and the people who've supported them for nearly 4 years now. They have not been very communicative at all. They have not stayed in regular contact. Frankly, this game should have been finished 2 years ago. I understand that they kept trying to up the scope and kept trying to put new modes in. Like, I don't understand why they tried to add in multiplayer. Multiplayer is a very complex thing to do, especially as a one-man team. Why are you trying to take a game that was fairly polished, had a great future, and then put multiplayer in halfway through the development cycle? It doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? It's not fiscally responsible. It's not realistic, frankly. From a development standpoint, it is not realistic. So it's almost like they had dreams of grandeur at some point. And for me, from a game perspective, it's a real shame, because the project had tons of potential and it was squandered. I mean, very few early access games have had so much positivity at launch than Nekro. And all for pretty much nothing, because it's gone nowhere. And people say, well, the Kickstarter people can't really be that, upset about it because they took a risk investing in the project. Well, that's very true. But here's the thing, this was not an unrealistic project from the start. It was a realistic project that the developers took to unrealistic heights. And at the end of the day, if I was a Kickstarter backer, and I've spoke to several who have backed Nekro for $300 or more, I can tell you right now, I'd be a little bit miffed for the fact that I've been paying someone's salary for nearly 4 years and I've got nothing from that. because that is ridiculous. That is crazy. And the fact that not only have I been paying your salary for 4 years, but you've been so uncommunicative. You basically dropped off the face of the earth for the entirety of 2015, and now it's basically drama, the game's taken down, we're done, we're walking away, it's all imploded. And that is just not good. That's just ridiculous. It's out of order completely. And I really feel for the Kickstarter backers and the players who bought the game on early access, because they still have the game on Steam. The store page has been taken down, obviously, but it is ultimately an abandoned project now. And frankly, it goes to show you how developers can take a gem and something with a lot of potential and something that people really like and just completely screw it up. Just completely make all the wrong decisions and just completely fuck it up royally. It is ridiculous. This was pretty easy. It was a straight shooter, let's be honest. It was quality. All you had to do was finish that single player campaign and friggin' launch the game. It is not that difficult to do, and yet we couldn't do that. We couldn't finish the single player campaign in 4 years. We had to add multiplayer co-op for no reason at all, because the game didn't actually need it whatsoever. And here we are. We're now here with, two people who are slagging each other off publicly. For what reason, I don't know. Because I can tell you right now, I've worked in business with business partners before, and I can tell you right now, if my business partner emptied out the business bank account and then closed it down, I would not be writing a post on Steam forums. I'd be writing a fucking statement to the police. That's what you do when you get robbed, right? You write a statement to the police. And I still don't understand, if they have the physical Kickstarter backer rewards, why the hell haven't they shipped them out yet? Because both posts sound like both basically are claiming that they've got the rewards, right? So if they've both got them, or one of them has them, how long have they had them for? A year? 2 years? Why haven't they shipped them out exactly? I don't understand. It is crazy, and I think ultimately, regardless on who's right and who's wrong, both have done wrong by the consumer ultimately, and that's where I stand. I stand on the consumer side, and frankly, you have let yourselves down, you've let the consumer down, and it's ultimately just disappointing, because you had a great IP, you had a great project, you had potential, you had support, and you have squandered it all. So there you go, that's what happened to Nekro.